Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
and I'm Stephen Park. And today we bring you Read 2 of Blossoms on a Poisoned Sea by Mariko Tatsumoto. We see some really strong characters in this read. Characters that are very willing to stick to their guns. They are very much willing to stand by what they believe in and go to the extents that they need to go to kind of work on their identity and who they believe are their characters. Now, where that brings me to is a more recent news story with a person named Shannon Ashley Garcia Mitchell, also known as Shay Mitchell.
Mm-hmm.
She's a Canadian actress and entrepreneur, and she's acted in things like Pretty Little Liars and You and Dollface, and she's been in a couple of other things. Recently, she's been in the news because in an interview she claimed that she was half Spanish, and I think her father's white. I can't remember if it was Irish or something, but she claimed a side of herself to be half Spanish from her mother's side, which isn't really true. So when we look at her backstory, she's actually from the Philippines, or her mother was from the Philippines, very specifically from where you were from the Philippines.
Pangasinan.
Oops, not that. She's from Pampanga. So she has her roots in the Philippines, and yet when she goes on this national media news, she talks about how as a kid she felt like she was always portraying a different identity and how she doesn't want to do that anymore. We've seen this with other actresses like Vanessa Hudgens and people who start to deny themselves because they have enough ability to look white that they can get away with not being Asian.
Mm-hmm.
For me, this is a little disturbing. I don't like the fact that people are willing to change themselves or their identity so that they can fit into certain spaces, but then pull back and then choose that identity when it's convenient to them.
Right, which is unfortunate because specifically in Filipino culture, anyone who's even partially Filipino or has far, far, far descendants of Philippine heritage, we celebrate them, we claim them, and we're happy to do so. And unfortunately, it's not always the same the other way around. Sometimes, and I guess many times, those who have Filipino heritage and grew up specifically in North America, especially Canada and the US, they seem to neglect or, like you said, completely shun their Filipino-ness.
Right. And the fact that she claims that she's Spanish seems like even a bigger issue because of the history that lives in the Philippines and how Philippines went through so much struggle from the Spanish attacking the native Filipinos, or I forget the actual original name of the Philippines.
Right. I don't know too much about the original name, but what I know is that it used to be called MAE, May, or Mae. Mae seems more possible.
Fair. The other part that's a little sad is that Shay Mitchell is actually cousins with Lea Salonga, who
Mm,
is one of the most famous and celebrated Filipino actors or actresses in our lifetime. And
yeah.
she was able to pave such a big route for people who are not white and who are Asian American from an early stage from the 90s where she was playing these background characters but never gave up her identity. So it feels like almost extra shameful that this person is turning her back on her culture and not willing to represent it as a part of who she is.
Mm-hmm. It's heartbreaking and unfortunate that Shay Mitchell and other celebrities would rather identify with the colonizer rather than their specific peoples.
Yep. And one of the issues might be that she never grew up in a community. And if that's the case, she may be looking for someone that's going to be like our recommendation for the week.
Our recommendation for the week is Roxanne Atienza. Roxanne Atienza is an art director and artist. Her goal is to bring people together through shared experiences to explore how we're all connected and to spread joy through creativity and art. She is also the co-founder of Kasama Collective, which is Richmond, Virginia's inclusive community celebrating and amplifying Asian American and Pacific Islander voices. What I most appreciate about Roxanne's artwork is that the lines are so crisp, the art is so stunning, and the color palettes are so captivating. You can learn more about Roxanne's work through their website at roxanneatienza.com. That's ROXANNEATIENZA.com. IENZA.com, and find them on IG at Rabbit on the Moon Draws, and that's rabbit with two eyes. You can also find Kasama Collective on Instagram at kasama.collective. That's KASAMA dot collective.
Yep. And that's going to be our recommendation for the week. Okay, so second read of Blossoms on a Poison Sea by Mariko Tatsumoto. This time around, we've read pages 84 through 168, which were chapters 11, The Big Show, through 20, Make Japan Great Again, which we'll talk about.
Yes.
But what have we learned through our first read?
Through our first read, we were introduced to Kiyo and Yuki, whose lives are worlds apart. Kiyo's family enjoys an upper class lifestyle, while Yuki's family makes their living as fishers. We also know that a strange disease starts affecting Minamata Bay with little to no answers on how it's spreading.
Yeah, and we start off the story a little bit differently than where we originally were going, and that's with a little bit more focus on the main characters, which were Yuki and Kiyo.
Mm-hmm.
More specifically, what we look at is the life of Yuki and her pursuit of becoming a really great artist, which ends up taking us to a prefectural art show, which Yuki invites Kiyo to.
Mm.
Within this art show, there's not a ton that goes on, but there is a series of events that happens fairly rapidly.
Yes, where Kiyo ends up asking the front desk to find a person who's local to teach Yuki art. So they meet this artist Goto, who eventually agrees to teach Yuki once a month while Kiyo gives his allowance as payment.
Right. And through this, what we see is that Yuki starts to pick up watercolor, and before she's able to pick up oil paintings, Yuki and Kyo get caught up in doing things within Goto's apartment without actually doing things.
Right, it seems a little PG.
Yeah, and I think the insinuation is that Goto walks into her apartment not knowing what's going on. No one's supposed to be there
Right.
because she never gave permission for Yuki to allow people to come into her apartment. So I get where Goto's coming from, but it seemed a little brash. It seemed unnecessary to cut off all these ties where Yuki was not only learning art, but she was also starting to financially pay for it herself, and she was kind of coming into her own as a person who
Mm-hmm.
could kind of find her own way and pave her own way for what she could then develop into an artist.
I agree. I felt like there was so much anger and such quickness to decide that there wasn't enough time to actually figure out what was going on to begin with.
Yep. But in a sense, I think Goto always seemed a little quirky. Like
Hmm.
she kind of had this way about her that seemed a little like chippy, kind of like the character from Mulan that did like the original makeup and stuff for Mulan when she was going to that ceremony of becoming
Yeah.
a woman.
Yeah.
Like very like chop chop, like you need to do this. Because at the same point, Yuki was I think 15 or 16 at the time that she's going through Goto.
Mm-hmm.
And Goto didn't offer any sort of like discount or any sort of help until Yuki was like, okay, what can I do to make up for this so that I can pay for it on my own?
Totally.
It seemed like if you saw talent in someone, you would try to help them out instead of making them pay full price. Also, knowing that the other 15-year-old, who's Kiyo, is paying all of his funds to try to get her an art education.
For sure. I wonder if it's a cultural thing. The fact that she's not giving discounts, one, and two, the fact that she was so quick to banish both of the kids, really.
Yeah, I don't think we'll be seeing too much of Goto from here on out.
Mm-hmm.
I think this character was just like a quick side story within the whole plot of everything that's going on in Minamata Bay. I think it also shows the development of who Yuki is becoming,
Right.
but it also leads us into the next role that Yuki has to play. And it's this person that has to start taking responsibilities for the things that are going on around her.
Mm-hmm.
One of which is for her neighbor, Nishio Hachiko.
Yes. Nisho Hachiko is one of the more poverty stricken neighbors in the Minamata Bay area. And Yuki bumps into her and finds out that she's running away from her family.
Yeah, and Yuki knows her from way back when, but hasn't really kept in contact. Nishio has gone on to live a life where she has married someone much older, has had two kids, but more recently, everyone in her family, between the husbands and the two sons, have contracted this strange disease.
Yeah.
So now Nishio's life has turned into one in which she's a caregiver for all three people, and that's something she's no longer wanting to do.
Right, especially because, as she says to Yuki, she's still so young, and this really isn't the way that she wanted to live her life.
Yeah. How did you feel about this? Because I thought this was a very fair assessment. I don't think the way that she handled it was perfect, but I also feel like you didn't marry into this thinking that you would have to completely sacrifice your own life for these people.
Right.
Granted, it is her family. What I would have hoped is that she would have got them some kind of help that wasn't her own or reached out in a way that the husband and the two sons could then be taken care of. But I don't think it's her role to have to take care of everybody.
Definitely, especially with this disease that requires full bodily help. Like, it's not just her cooking for them, it's not just her trying to get them to sleep. It's doing everything, having to lift them up, make sure they're sitting up straight, and having to spoon feed them their food. So, I also wish that she could have been the one to pass on the help. Or another thing that I was thinking was, why didn't she just bring them to the hospital? I know that they're poverty stricken, but that could have been the place that she could have left them.
That was also what I was thinking was the main solution that she could have given because the hospital already knew about this disease. They already had places that were settled for people who were patients with these very similar symptoms.
Mhm.
So it seemed like a place that she could take them. I don't agree with the way that she left them.
Right.
I don't agree that she should have abandoned her family, but I guess the part that I could empathize with is how bad this situation was.
Mm-hmm.
Because when Yuki walks in and goes to check on the family, it's like no one was taking care of them for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
even knowing that Nishio was there and even prepared their last meal before she left.
Right. And I think it's so brave of Yuki to enter into this house, into this space, and not only care for them, but actually look for their next of kin.
Right, and it was brave in the way that she handled that communication because the next of kin is this husband's sister, and the sister is kind of not willing to take in her brother, and in a way that she's looking down on Nishio and she's looking down on other people, and Yuki's kind of fighting back and saying, "How are you the person that's looking down on this person when this is also your blood and the person that you were born with and should be taken care of? This is your familial responsibility."
Right, which is a very collective mindset. I was definitely thinking while reading this that this wouldn't fly in US.
Yeah, I think in the US they would be sent to some home or something, like, I don't know, or left on the streets. Like, this is very much a mindset of where a lot of Southeast Asian or African or like cultures that are so deeply enveloped within the tribal mindset,
Mm-hmm.
you can't leave people behind. You have to take care of them,
Yes.
even if they're your neighbors, which is what Yuki does.
Right.
So we see Yuki developing. We see the person that she's becoming, even though she's not had many resources for herself. On the other side, we see the battle that Kiyo is having.
Mm-hmm.
And this battle is much more with what he believes is right and wrong, which then involves his father, Chiso, the scientists, and trying to figure out what the heck is going on at Minamata Bay.
Right. And unfortunately, this battle between right and wrong within Kiyo is filling in gaps that don't need to be filled, which to me means that he's trying to make things look right when they're actually wrong.
Yeah, as responsible as we see Kiyo is, he's still just a child.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of funny that in these chapters that we've read, we see Yuki grow up to someone who's much more mature, and we see Kyo kind of going from this person that knows what he wants to do with his life, seems like everything's going really well, and turn back towards a child as he's talking to his father and talking to the people that are making all these decisions. And he's just being told left and right, what's wrong. He ends up doing some childish things at the Chiso factory, which we'll get into, but it's just a really weird kind of graph where we're seeing the development of these two main characters and how they've switched and they've replaced each other's roles.
Mm, definitely.
So through Kiyo's eyes, we see the conflict that Kichiro, his father, is going through.
Mm-hmm.
Kichiro knowingly is involved in the scheme of polluting the Minamata Bay.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we see is that his son Tadahisa wants to be a part of Chiso, but Kichiro doesn't want to allow his son to do that.
Right. And he's making the excuse that Tokyo has better opportunities for him and he shouldn't go to Chiso anymore.
Well, I think we're assuming that that's an excuse.
Hmm.
There was no part in the book where we know that for sure,
Right.
but there is an assumption that Kichiro must think that parts of Chiso are bad.
Yes.
Verbally, though, Kichiro does tout the benefits of what Chiso has done, how much they have built up Japan, and how much Chiso has helped Japan recover after the war.
Mm-hmm.
We see him constantly denying the effects of the waste and what it's doing to the Minamata Bay.
Right.
We see him talking about the French or someone's machinery that or weapons that were lost in the sea that is now affecting this. And we can only assume that he doesn't believe that it's real because honestly, it could be coming top down and he could be someone that's ignorant to believe this. I don't think that's true by the way his personality is shown,
Hmm.
but it could be true
That he believes what he's doing is right?
that he believes that what he's saying is a part of the truth.
Hmm. I don't know if it's top down. I mean, it's definitely top. Like we mentioned earlier, there was a part where Kiyo tries to confront both the president and vice president in their offices, which, like you said, seemed very childlike.
More than childlike, I think it was childish,
Mm.
where he just storms into the rooms of the president and the vice president, who are the top of the company of a major company.
Right.
So, in all aspects, with someone that is even aware of what that might do to your father's job as someone that's below them, it shouldn't be something that you do.
Right. When I first read it, I thought it was brave, but after mulling over it, it was like, yeah, he definitely should have thought of what it would do to his father's company and to his father in general.
Yeah, and he pretty much marched in there calling them liars, like,
Mm.
why aren't you doing this? And he didn't have anything to give them that was substantial.
Right.
It was him throwing a tantrum and hoping that that would somehow work.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of it is that we consistently see the scientists making progress on finding out what's happening. We see reports of how the waste removal was dumped from one side to another,
Mm-hmm.
which shows the effects of the death and the life at sea that's kind of being affected. We see the results of the labs that are showing these heavy metals within the things that are dead and the subjects that are involved.
Mm-hmm.
And later on in the story, we see a study that gets removed by the Chiso factory with these cats that are used as subjects to gain insight on how these metals are being affected to species that can be affected.
Right, which is a little sad going back to the cats. I was like, why did you have to use cats? But I get where they were coming from, especially when Dr. Hosokawa mentioned that these are stray cats and they were going to eat the fish anyway, so we might as well study them.
Yeah, it still was sad, but in the end, I feel like all that information was trying to be used for good.
Mhm.
And in a time where you're so desperate, it seemed like a solution that wasn't inhumane in a sense, but just needed to be done in a way.
Mhm.
What we also see in this read is sadly the effects of Minamata Bay to Yuki's father.
Right. He contracts the disease himself.
Right. And he's starting to go through the process of getting worse and worse, losing his ability to move. And this is where I think we start to see it affect Yuki's family a little bit more. We see it affect Kiyo and possibly become one of the reasons why Kiyo is starting to turn a little bit more childish. It's just he might feel hopeless and not know where to go from there.
Mm-hmm.
We also see the corruption of the Chiso factory in the way that they're handling things like the Fisherman's March, which Yuki, Kiyo, and Yuki's father go to. We see how Chiso, in the end of all this, is holding this press conference with this filtering system, talking about how expensive it is, and using this as a method to try to clean up, I guess, the ocean, but also their press.
Right. Like they're trying to look good while not being good.
Right. Along with that, the end scene was that the president of Chiso takes a cup and drinks the drinking water from the filtration system that they just spent. This kind of goes into predictions, but do you think that that's a true filtration system and that it's working to help actually clean up the water?
I don't think it is. I think it's more of a scheme or like a ruse to pretend like something's being done, when in actuality, it might just be running water through nothing.
That's what I was thinking too. I don't believe that the president of CHISO is so confident or so brass to be willing to take those measures of risking his own life for this. So when he drank that water, I was more thinking, this is a scheme, it's a sham, this has not been proven in any way. And the fact that this just all of a sudden got built just randomly because of this bad press is a little pun, it's a little fishy,
Yes, absolutely fishy.
dead fishy. The other thing that I think that we need to talk about is Kachiro. I think there's some good in Kachiro. One of the reasons I say that is a lot of the things that he says is coming from a top organization and it's things that he's repeating. He constantly talks about how he needs to earn for his family. He needs to be the person that is giving to the people that he loves. We see his body wear down. We see his mental facilities start to just feel like they're breaking down, along with the wrinkles in his eyes and the drooping of his shoulders. His body's being destroyed by the process of trying to keep this lie afloat.
Hmm.
What do you think of Kichiro?
I think I give him less leeway. I think he's more and more buying into the thought process of the president and the vice president. Yes, it's wearing him down. Yes, he has all this press and all this information that he's trying to juggle and trying to battle with. But I think he truly believes that they're not doing anything wrong.
The question that comes to mind for me is if someone steals a loaf of bread to feed their family, are they a bad person?
Not necessarily, no.
So in this time, they just recovered from war and he's trying to feed his family. Us knowing how much harm it's causing everyone else makes it harder to see. But if he's just trying to provide for his family and he's not the executioner, does that still make him a terrible person?
It doesn't make him a terrible person, no, but I still think he's buying into the thought process. I think he's so far down that road at this point that he can't rethink of what's right or wrong. Like you said, he's now only thinking about his family.
Right. I don't think he's a good person. I don't think what his actions and his justifications for his actions are correct. But I also feel a sense of him trying to be a provider and caregiver in this time and how he grew up with poverty and trying to get their family out of that. So I
Mhm.
kind of see where he is, but also once you start hearing these stories of people dying and how they're dying, you should be the person that starts to turn back no matter what that becomes because it's no longer like you're kind of just like doing a little bit of wrong in the world. You're messing up people's families' lives and just everyone's well-being.
Right.
Along with that, and people messing up people's well-beings, let's talk about the last chapter.
Mm-hmm.
So, the title of the last chapter is Make Japan Great Again. This was a hard thing to read and a thing that I had to look over very quickly.
What do you mean by look over very quickly?
Like, I didn't want to look into it too much for a couple different reasons, but how did you feel about that title?
I remember reading it and thinking, yikes.
Mm-hmm.
The reason is because it mimics one very popular slogan here in the US.
Yeah, and so we don't know if the author knows this and is actively doing this on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that was a big part of it, is that it's a slogan that is very well known for a very specific person and the ideology that it stands behind.
Right.
The other thing for me is that when we talk about a slogan like Make America Great Again, we're talking about bringing down other countries. We're talking about leaving the Paris Treaty climate. We're talking about destroying these contracts that we've had with other countries and going into and providing services for wars against other countries so that America can, quote unquote, be great again. In the sense of where Japan is and where they just came from. Because we're talking about 1956 and they talk
Mhm.
about the war, but we've also just come out of an occupation of Korea from 1910 to 1945. So when we're talking about Japan becoming great again, we are possibly talking about the downfall of Korea again, or we're talking about the raping and pillaging and the effects that it has with the countries that are neighboring them. So I don't like the sentiment of nationalism where it's we're going to make ourselves good
Mhm.
because we've seen that tried so many times. We've seen it tried in Nazi Germany, Stalin Russia, Mussolini Italy. Like we've seen it tried so many times of nationalism that this just didn't seem right. Luckily, it's a part of the story that I think I get where it's coming from, and it's not meant to be destructive. It's meant to be let's build up Japan so that we can be a country that is now recognized again instead of like let's become a world power.
Mm.
But that verbiage is so strong and so ingrained within American culture now that if it's a book that's in English in America, it's a hard 4 words to read.
Definitely. And it's not just history, it's something that's happening now,
Right.
such as in Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, it was very hard to read. It's not something that I could have taken lightly. Definitely, while reading through the chapter, I tried to give it the benefit of the doubt. I tried to look past what the slogan was and tried to figure out what exactly was the message behind the entire chapter.
Right. Overall, the read was really good. Besides those 4 words, I'm still very much enjoying this read. There's a certain sense of everything continuing to flow and the story carrying along so easily
Hmm.
that I am very much enjoying the read.
I am too, and I want to keep enjoying the read.
Yeah, and there's like little conflicts here. We see these characters developing, and the way that we're seeing the world through these two children's eyes gives us a certain amount of innocence in this time where there's so much corruption and so much negativity. So I like the perspective that's happening, and I'm excited to see where this goes. I don't think we've finished with the corruption of Chiso. I think there's going to be a lot with that company that we still get into,
Absolutely.
but we don't know until we go into our third read, which are pages 169 through 256, which are chapters 21, Sister, Won't You Turn Over, through chapter 31, which is Riot. For people that are reading along, if you have any questions, if you have enjoyed this book as much as we have, if you've had any thoughts on any of the topics that we've discussed, how can people reach out to us?
You can email us at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com or join the conversation on Instagram at asianbookclubpod.
Yep, and we also have our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com, which has our bookshop, which have books that we've read in the past, books that we recommend, and books that we plan to read in the future.
And a great way to support us is to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast.
Otherwise, make sure to be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat!
Bye.
Bye!